Hey everyone, Chat Sematary is back. I'm your host, Deanna Chapman, and I am joined once again by Katie Schaefer. This time we are talking about the 1997 movie Trucks. It is the second adaptation of the short story by the same name, the first being Maximum Overdrive. Katie, you joined me for that one as well, so is it just something about this story and these movies that fascinates you with how not great they are?
Yes, it absolutely is. Because it seems like such a ridiculous concept and turns out also makes a ridiculous movie.
And who knew that we would need two adaptations of it?
You know, we all knew we didn't. We all knew that there was no need for a second one. When I found out there was a second one, I was like, it can't possibly be as, both great and terrible as Maximum Overdrive. Like, that is so fun to watch because it's this perfect cluster of ridiculous, from a coked out Stephen King directing to Emilio Estevez starring to the insane props and explosions in the film. Like, it's gorgeous in its stupidity. This, on the other hand, not so much.
This just felt very bleak from the start. And, it kind of ties in the Tommyknockers and the Stand with the backstory and Area 51 and everything going on like that. So you kind of get this Tommyknockers vibe, which you and I both did not like either the book or the adaptation, really. So you just have this sort of backstory attached to it that isn't really appealing. And at least with Maximum Overdrive, you had the backing of the AC/DC soundtrack, and you had sort of this higher intensity going on throughout that entire movie because of the other things you mentioned already as well. And with this one, it just felt so bland in comparison. And, just to run down sort of the cast and crew here, it's directed by Chris Thompson. The screenwriter is Brian Taggart. It stars really just Timothy Busfield and Brenda Bake, I want to say. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her last name properly, but they're the two that are sort of trying to at least give a solution where you have some other random truckers there. You have a couple of teenagers there, one of which is highly, highly annoying. She is kind of like the Yeardley Smith of this movie.
Yes, good comparison.
And it's nothing against Yeardley Smith. Obviously, she's been super successful, but she just had that whiny voice that was constantly nagging throughout the whole movie. And this girl just screamed every time something happened. And it's like, okay, we get it. You saw a dead body and you didn't think this was going to continue happening because people are stupid. And then she would do equally stupid things like running to the pipe and, just doing all of these things that made no sense whatsoever. And you kind of just want her to go away the whole time.
Yep. She's just angsty teen.
Yes,
angsty
Abby is
teen
her name.
From the 90s. Yes, and she's just irritating. Like, I think this movie feels like a collection of characters as opposed to, which it really feels that way as opposed to like, oh, these are unique people. It's just, oh, here's, hick trucker. Here's angsty teen. Here's, weird military dad. And it just feels so by the numbers. And it's a movie about killer trucks. You should never be able to make something feel by the numbers when that's your outrageous storyline. It's just such a poorly done adaptation.
Absolutely. And you have the fact that you have the whole Area 51 thing going on too. And I was kind of like, I don't remember this quite as much in Maximum Overdrive. And I honestly don't remember the short story at all by this point. But it was one of those things where I was like, okay, late 90s, were the Area 51 things just super popular and running rampant with these theories? Because the movie really seemed to be doing that. And I was like, okay, maybe it's sort of more of the time and the city is called Lunar. And you're just like, all right, I get it. You want the alien theme to come across here. And I will give it a little credit, though, because in Maximum Overdrive, I did notice when some of the people were actually in the trucks driving them. And in this, I don't recall noticing that at all. So I think they did a nicer job of keeping, anyone driving the trucks hidden.
Yes, they did. I never saw anybody either. And I think probably because there's not quite as many shots of it. There's a lot of it in Maximum Overdrive. And in this, they're pretty judicious with how often you see the trucks to maximize the scariness of it, which is a good choice. You know, I liked that part of it.
Yeah, story-wise, though, it's just really all over the place. With Maximum Overdrive, you have all these people come to this one place, and you have these tensions, and there's certain people trying to figure it out, and you have that here, but it never felt like as much of a group effort as I think it did in Maximum Overdrive, with both the arguing and the problem solving.
Yeah, exactly. This feels like they kind of all just stumbled in together, whereas in Maximum Overdrive, it is much more of like a group of people who would all be in these places anyway who get stuck in this situation. And in Trucks, it feels contrived. So it just is. And there's the scene, I think the worst scene for me with that is the cell phone where she's calling him to come pick her up. And then she meets these other people and you're just kind of going, what? What?
Yeah, it's like she was picking people up to go on one of the tours of the city or something, and then you had a couple who went to the gas station and they were waiting for her to come back to also pick them up, and it was just a little confusing where anyone was supposed to be at any given time. So to have at least Ray and his son Logan at the gas station, and you know that's sort of their home base, that's the thing they own, you know, you get the backstory as to why they came here. It just felt that they were like, okay, how do we get all of these random people together? And you just kind of make things up as you go to have them all end up back at the gas station. And obviously truckers being there and the older man who was sort of the cook, caretaker, what have you, of the little diner inside, it felt like they were trying a little too hard to match that vibe exactly like how it was in Maximum Overdrive. And it made me curious as to why this story is one that King agreed to have adapted again, unless at this point he didn't own the rights for doing the adaptation again or something. But because he wrote and directed Maximum Overdrive, you're kind of like, okay, we know how he feels about that movie now. So was he thinking someone else was going to be able to do it better? Or should he have just let it go and not have anyone tackle this story again? I'm leaning towards the latter, obviously, but just his thinking behind it kind of makes me wonder what was going on at this time.
Yeah, me too. Because it's such a serious take on this story where Maximum Overdrive is ridiculously over the top and knows how crazy it is. You know, it kills a man with a Coke machine by shooting him in the nuts and then crushing his head. Like, a movie that does that knows that it is not the most serious thing in the world, you know? And in this, everything is deadly serious. You know, which, I mean, it's a serious situation, but it's also a completely ridiculous situation. And so that no one ever really sees that, and that the movie most of all doesn't see it, is a really big part of, I think, why it doesn't work. Because the alien angle of it is just so pushed, but we never actually see any aliens, and that threat is never really expanded upon. So it's just this background noise that takes away from other aspects they could have developed in the story that would have been more interesting.
Yeah, I just thought that overall it was a bad movie, not a fun bad movie like Maximum Overdrive. So it's not that it necessarily looked bad, because like we mentioned, you don't see any of the drivers hiding while they drive the trucks, but it just didn't have the same kind of impact or silliness that Maximum Overdrive had, because even in that you get sort of this brutal scene where the kid is riding his bike and he sort of sees all of this destruction because the Coke machine has attacked the coach and he's just trying to get away, and you see all of the machines in general taking over, not just the trucks. And in this you don't have any of that. It's just the trucks.
Yeah, so there's no continuity between, okay, well, why is it just the trucks? Like in Maximum Overdrive, it's just machines in general, which is also very confusing, but whatever. But in this, like you said, it's just some trucks coming after people, and it doesn't seem like even all of the trucks, because there's vehicles that they drive by that don't act up. So it's just like, I'm sure a lot of it is the budget, because they could only do so much, because you can tell this movie suffered from a very, very small budget. And it ends up feeling like not, like the continuity is just not there, and it doesn't make sense even within its own contrived world.
Yeah, it was one of those movies too where it's not even that trucks is hard to find. It's just the will to want to watch it. It wasn't really there from the start. As soon as I was like, oh, this is another adaptation of the Trucks short story. And because you have such iconography that goes along with Maximum Overdrive, and we talked about something very similar recently with The Shining. Kubrick created this insane iconography to go along with his movie, especially with the Grady twins and just putting in other things, that when you have something like Maximum Overdrive where that toy truck with the Green Goblin on the front just stands out so much, everything in this just looks so bland and boring in comparison.
Right. I have, you and I both have a pin of that toy truck, and like I wear it on my backpack at work, and I've had people come up to me and go, oh my God, Maximum Overdrive, because they know that truck is associated with it, because it's just such a icon of the story and the movie and King's more ridiculous work. And yeah, this movie has none of that. It's all very yellow and desert-like, yeah. And there's almost no bright colors, and it just feels...
Because they're in like New Mexico, right?
Yes.
Or something?
I think, yeah, because they're by Area 51. So it just feels like it's not only a chore to watch because of the story and the poor script, it's a chore to watch because it's just really boring, like visually. Your brain just kind of smudges it all together because there's nothing to contrast with the rest of the screen.
You don't have too many memorable things in this. You know, you don't have someone as charismatic as Emilio Estevez, really. You don't have that truck iconography that's going to stick in your mind for years after watching this. You know, 2-3 years from now, I don't know what I'm going to remember from this.
I don't know if I'll remember I watched it.
Right?
Like, it's just that, like, well, whatever.
Yeah, and I know we kind of joke about how long our episodes are going to be before we start recording, because it's one of those things where if we wanted to go into every little detail and pick it apart, we probably could, but I definitely prefer to be a little more constructive than just sort of tearing things down. So I think with this, there's a lot of downsides to it, but I feel like there is a good version of this movie somewhere between this and Maximum Overdrive, where it's not super over the top like Maximum Overdrive, but it also doesn't take itself too seriously like this one does. And I think maybe if you would have mixed some of the elements a little better, like if you're going to mention Area 51, really play on that. Show us these weird, mysterious things happening that make you feel like there's an actual alien presence, because you have the explosion, but it's obvious it's an explosion. It's not aliens. All the power goes out. You know, instead, maybe have the power go out without the explosion and have it be a little more unexplainable.
Right. Like they leave the Chekhov's gun concept of Area 51 on that mantelpiece. And so throughout the movie, you're expecting it to come into play. And it never really does. And that's such a missed opportunity. Like I too would have liked to see something that was more invested in showing us the whys of this is happening. Because like Maximum Overdrive doesn't show us, it gives like a 2-second explanation. And for that movie, that's all you need. But if you want to tell a more serious and in-depth story about this concept, then you need to give us more to chew on rather than just aliens, Area 51. You know, that just doesn't give you enough to really care about, because you're like, oh, well, you're never actually going to show me any aliens, so why do I care?
I'm not someone who is usually in favor of flashbacks, but I think because they had someone in the building who literally worked at Area 51, maybe you ask him to tell you a story while you're waiting for it to get dark so he can leave on the motorcycle, because then you would have this opportunity for him to flash back to working at Area 51, showing maybe that it does just look like a military base, but behind him you sort of see something shady going on that maybe he doesn't know about, because it sounded like he was really just one of the helicopter pilots. So you could have done something as, I want to say as simple as that, but I don't know how simple that actually would have been in reality as far as, actually making it work within the film. But you have this moment where they're literally like, oh, let's wait until dark. And it's like, okay, then give them something to do in the meantime. Don't just have them kind of panicking still. Have them trying to calm themselves down, tell stories, do something while they wait for it to get dark enough for him to escape and walk the motorcycle far enough away to turn it on and leave.
Right. Use the time wisely. Don't just have them sit there, because it just makes it boring. And they really just couldn't get out of the idea of making this boring. And that sucks, because we've seen how fun and over the top this story can be. And so watching it is kind of disappointing, because it's like, oh, well, this is the trucks story. I'm ready for some crazy. And then just nothing crazy really ever happens.
Yeah, I think it just fell really short of taking itself seriously to the point where it was actually going to be good. So you have all of these things that you could make a little less serious, add a little more to the story, and really play into sort of the Tommyknockers theme that they kind of set you up for, but not really, because, that's also something that happened in Maine, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe, the Tommyknockers weren't just in Maine. Maybe they were here too, and that sort of started the whole Area 51 conspiracy theory thing. Who knows? Just sort of play into it more so that you get some sort of enjoyment out of it.
Right. You've had 6 good ideas that would have made this movie better. It's like they just they're like, we really want to do something different and unique. And then they didn't. And it's just very frustrating, because it feels like a lost potential, where even something like this that most people, if you tell them you're watching it, are like, what's wrong with you? It's not a good movie. I haven't seen it, but I can already tell you it's not a good movie. It's like, well, there are versions of this movie that could be good. Maybe not, amazing. It's never going to be The Irishman or something, but it could still be fun and enjoyable to watch. And this is neither fun or very enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. What did you think of the ending with the helicopter scene? Because that's the only scene where you get that it extends beyond just the trucks.
Yes. Yep. And it didn't make a whole lot of sense. That I was really confused by. I was like, well, why is that helicopter helping them? It introduced the idea of, are there good machines that are interested in saving the humans? Or is this just, something terrible is going to happen now that we're not going to get to see? It just was more confusing.
Or is the Area 51 guy flying it remotely somehow? You're kind of just like, what's going on here? And it was a very confusing ending for sure.
Yes. And then it's over and you're like, oh, okay, I don't know if I should be happy or sad by this. And I feel like I'm supposed to know how I should feel about this, and I just don't. Too many unanswered questions.
Needless to say, I am very glad that I just rented this and did not spend money buying a copy of this.
Yep, it cost us each $2, and it was, $2. It wasn't too bad for that, because we then got to have this fun conversation about it.
Yeah, so I think, you and I don't have a ton more to say about it. What did you end up rating this?
Oh, this is definitely like a 1 out of 5, or maybe a half star out of 5.
I gave it a 1.5. I gave it a little boost just because there were some people I recognized in it, and it didn't feel like they were being too over the top with their acting. They did some interesting things with the cast, I think, that I was a little hopeful at first, but then when you see everything that happens by the end of it, you're like, oh, okay, they kind of wasted this cast.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Because some of it, I agree, some of the cast do a pretty decent job. the guy, like the main character, redhead guy.
Ray.
Yeah. Ray does a decent job, and he's interesting, and the relationship he has with the kid feels very real and all of that. But yeah, I would say 1 star, and mostly because, like, well, now I can say I have seen this.
Yeah. So again, I was a little more generous than you were, just like I was a little more generous with The Shining, but it's just something where I understood what they were trying to do. I just think the execution was way off, and that maybe this was just unnecessary all around.
Yeah. They either needed more budget or to just not make it. I think if they'd had a bigger budget, it could have been different, because then maybe we would have gotten that flashback scene or something like that, because I'm sure that's not cheap.
Yeah.
So maybe it could have been something more, but it didn't live up to any kind of potential, unfortunately.
Well, Katie, thank you so much for coming on to talk about some of King's not as good adaptations, to say the least. You know, it's one of those things where you're like, oh, this is coming up on the schedule. Let me brace myself.
Yes, but thankfully I really love like bad media and bad movies and stuff. So sometimes I watch it in the hopes that it'll be another one that I can tell all my friends, "Oh, dude, you got to see this."
Yeah.
And this unfortunately was not one of those, but that's okay. Hope springs eternal for bad movies.
Yeah, and then we kind of just watch them looking forward to the conversation instead.
Yep. I always know we'll have fun talking about it regardless of how bad it is. I mean, we made The Golden Years fun, and that movie was so much worse than this one.
Exactly. Well, thank you again, and hopefully, you know, we'll have some good things come up for you soon.
I'm sure we will.
All right, that does it for this episode of Chat Sematary. You can support the podcast on Patreon for $1 a month. You'll get a thank you on the show. For $2 a month, I will send you a Chat Sematary sticker. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can do so at Chat Sematary on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You could also rate and review the show. That's a huge help. And as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.